All right, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate those of you who are able to join live today. For those of you who signed up and weren't able to make it live, hello from the past. I hope the future is just a little bit better. This is a very just like kind of one-off special workshop. I think it'll be one-off. Who knows? Maybe I'll do it again. But I just kind of like felt compelled to try and pull this off and talk through. I couldn't believe that this was floating around on the internet. And I got to give a shout out to the company Charter, that's CHARTR.co. They've got an amazing newsletter, and they just happened to like casually, if you weren't paying attention, you wouldn't have even noticed it. They casually backlinked to this Trump Media Group pitch deck in the middle of one of their stories. And so I jumped on that right away, immediately saved the PDF and everything. And as I was going through it, there was just so many things that were hitting me that I felt were worth just sharing with everyone. I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to take a look at as a storyteller myself. It's really interesting to see like how they framed a lot of this stuff. And I think for all of us on here who are coming for different reasons, it can be really interesting to see like, how do you tell your own stories, right? And so what I want to do first is just get an understanding of those of you who are in attendance. I'm going to put this poll up on the screen. All it says is, why are you here today? Why'd you tune in? Your options are, I'm raising capital soon and might want some investor pitching insight, or I'm a seller or sales leader and I want some sales pitching insight, as well as I don't want any insight. I'm just really curious about this Trump thing in the first place. All right, so we got a lot of salespeople on here. Cool. All right, so it looks like majority sales. We got a couple people who are interested in raising capital, a couple people who are just plain curious. Awesome. So there's the results if you want to see. So we're going to talk through storytelling, right? And how it was applied in this specific scenario. Before we do that, I just want to, for those of you, I don't know how familiar everyone is here with me already. So let me just do a quick overview. I'm calling this workshop Pitching the President. I guess that's the name I came up with this morning. So if you're not already familiar with my work or familiar with Startup Hypeman, I want to just give a quick introduction here. My name is Rajiv Nathan, aka Raj Nation. My company is Startup Hypeman, and I think to understand like why I'm doing this content today and why I have this company in the first place, it's important to understand sort of like how I see the world. And at base, my fundamental driving force in life is this notion that everyone deserves to have a voice. Now, I think what's important is that you have to use your voice responsibly, but I think everyone deserves to have a voice. And that's what drives all of my professional and creative endeavors. So if you don't know me, I am a hip hop artist. I'm also a yoga instructor. I'm also a professional ring announcer for MMA and combat sports. And then the chief pitch artist and founder of Startup Hypeman, where we work specifically with both early stage and scaling startups to help them not suck at how they pitch themselves, not suck at how they tell their story, so they can stand out to their audience and stand apart from everyone else. And kind of the lens we take to pitching and storytelling is one that is very much influenced by that other, the rest of that background that you see that I have. Very much influenced by content and media and entertainment. And how do we look at that as more of a guidepost for how to do B2B? Because I think what you're already starting to see a trend of, that I think you'll even see more of, is B2B acting more like B2C. Through this work with Startup Hypeman, we've just had the honor to work with so many interesting companies across 30 different cities in 7 countries and 4 continents. We've helped companies raise millions through capital raises, as well as do a ton of sales and put together a whole bunch of pitch competition winners as well, or finishing in the very top place. I know at least one of the people who's on the live today is one of those multi-time pitch competition winners. So for today's workshop, we're going to go through this Donald Trump pitch deck. I do just want to have like a couple of house rules up front. One of them is that I want you to use the chat today, but please no like F the libs or F the right wing like in the chat. I want this to be focused on like the content you're experiencing and less about like less about like your political take, more or less, right? That said, I mean, I will say up front, like while I'm sharing this stuff today, I think it's probably worth noting that I did not vote for Donald Trump in either election. I personally don't think I ever would. And I'm still, even though I have that background, I'm trying to take an objective opinion on this today. But I don't actually support the notion of this new social media platform, Truth Social. But let's keep the chat civil, please. Let's keep it focused on like the storytelling, the pitching, the angles, right? I do want to see kind of like your live reactions as you're seeing some of this stuff, but try to hold off, or do your best to hold off on like, on like slander in the process. The other thing that I think is important to know before we get into the deck is just like as some background information, if you're not familiar. So they launched this alternative social media platform called Truth Social. You're going to see a couple acronyms. You're going to see Truth Social, but then you'll see TMTG, which stands for Trump Media and Technology Group. And that's the company that's behind Truth Social. And you'll see kind of this, you'll see behind Truth Social and also a larger thing as well. The TMTG reportedly raised $1 billion to get this thing off the ground. And in a statement, Donald Trump said the money raised means that his company, Trump Media and Technology Group, will be in a stronger position to fight back against the tyranny of big tech. He then went on to say $1 billion sends an important message to big tech that censorship and political discrimination must end. America is ready for Truth Social, a platform that will not discriminate on the basis of political ideology. I share that with you up front for a couple of reasons. One of them is just at a baseline level. I think what's important to note is that anytime you see a founder raise money, in the press release afterwards announcing the raise, whether it's $1 million seed or a $25 million Series A or $1 billion, notice how what they talk about is what this means for the future, right? And what this money is going to help them accomplish. What you never see them talk about in a press release or in an article quote, they don't say, this is going to help us, what is it? This is going to help us put money towards, to put $200K towards legal and put $300K towards product engineering, right? That's not how it's ever phrased when the announcement is made. And so knowing that that's what the announcement is like in any fundraising scenario, also think about when you're in your own fundraising scenario, if you're pitching for funding, like, are you focusing more on the specific tools you need to like get to a certain point, or are you focusing on that end point, that end destination? And I think that applies both for funding and for sales, right? Are you focusing in your sales pitch more on sort of like the micro, like here's how it works, versus focusing on here's what the here's what we're trying to accomplish collaboratively for you as a potential customer. The other reason I wanted to show that quote for you up front is because I think understanding that as like the big picture in the beginning, I think will help you understand like why certain things are pitched the way they are in the actual deck. So I want to pull up that presentation now. Another heads up, if you've got questions along the way, please use the Q&A button. I've got that pulled up here so I can see that along with the chat, but sometimes if there's a question in the chat, it gets lost in like the stream of consciousness if there's multiple messages that come after it. So if you throw your question in the Q&A section, I will definitely see it and I will definitely answer it. Also, again, make sure on your Zoom, there's a blue button in the chat window right above where you would type any message. There's a blue drop-down button, and it either says hosts and panelists or everyone. So please make sure you toggle it to everyone. Otherwise, if you send a message, it's only going to go to me. Okay, so that said, let's see if we have compliance on this. If you're ready to dive into this deck and hear some analysis on it, go ahead and say ready in the chat, and I'll pull it up. Ready. Okay. All right, Bianca, I need you to change, Bianca and Mike, I need you to change to everyone because you're still on host and panelist. And Dapo, you're still on host and panelist. So make sure you change it to everyone. All right. So now that we are ready, let me pull this up. Okay, so here's the deal, everyone. Like I said, TMTG is the company behind this, Trump Media and Technology Group. It's a brand new company, essentially launched for this purpose. Couple things I'm going to say out of the gate. I think it's worth noting that with his connections and his capital, like Donald Trump probably could have just arranged letters in an alphabet, literally in his alphabet soup, and still probably raised a bunch of money. He may not have even actually needed to raise any money. He might have just done it to build some extra hype and to get the right strategic people on board. But I do want to kind of sort of talk this through the lens of what if maybe that wasn't the case and he actually did have to make his case? Because I think there's probably still a little bit of that in play. Because I think even with his popularity, I have to imagine there were at least a few investors who still needed convincing that this is a bet worth taking. So again, this is the overarching company behind this, and then I'll talk about this Digital World Acquisition Corp in a second. Overall, as we go through this presentation, this is a designer's worst nightmare. This looks like it was made in PowerPoint 95. It's kind of amazing to me that $1 billion was raised on just again, an awful visual looking presentation. But I think, if you got one of my emails, what I said there was, I think you may have a little bit more leniency as the former president to just not have to have not just not well-designed slides, but terribly designed slides. So, right. So there's just disclaimer that they have to get out of the way, the legal stuff. Immediately what they go into is this Digital World Acquisition Corp, and talking up who this person, Patrick Orlando, is. I think it's important to understand that this company, Digital World Acquisition Corp, DWAC, apparently, according to this, they're actually out of the gate acquiring TMTG, Trump Media. And so I think to start off, they're just getting these acquisition details out of the way by stating, hey, here's who's leading the acquisition. This is why that person is credible, with the financials behind it. So you can see here, if I go to this next slide, you can see apparently they're buying Trump Media at an initial purchase price of $875 million. And then they intend to raise approximately $1 billion on top of that. So I don't know why that was necessary up front, or why that needed to happen for this to get off the ground, but something financially said they needed to do this to get Trump Media going. Generally speaking, though, let's say there's not an acquisition as the start of the premise of something. I am not a fan at all of putting the executive team slide first. I see this a lot in both investor pitch decks and sales pitch decks, starting off in the first slide or one of the first 3 slides with your founder bio or your CEO's bio or your executive team bio. And then if it's the full executive team, you have the little mini bios with headshots there, and everyone has 15 plus 20 plus 30 years experience. And so then combined, they have 176 years of experience somehow, right? And that's what your company brings to the table for investors or for customers, right? I'm really not a fan of doing that out of the gate. The only place where I think it can be helpful is if you have a pedigree of former CEO of Uber, right? With something that is so mega, not MAGA, something that is so mega that it just creates almost an air of heightened awareness right out of the gate. So that's where it can be helpful to establish credibility right off the bat. But even if that were the case, if you were former, founder of Pinterest or something, people already know who you are at that point. So I think generally speaking, I'm of the belief that whether it's a customer or an investor, if you're in the room with them or you're on the Zoom with them, you've already established some baseline credibility. And therefore, you don't need to open with your credentials. You don't need to start off your sales pitch or your investor pitch by saying your own personal, professional background or your CEO's professional background. Okay, so they get that out of the way. And then now I think this is kind of like this next slide is like the true sort of like beginning of the presentation. And what we have here is them saying, okay, we are a mission-driven organization. Okay. TMTG will fight for the First Amendment protections and freedoms of all Americans, protect democracy, and defend capitalism. And they go into their vision. TMTG aspires to create a media powerhouse to rival the liberal media consortium and fight back against the big tech companies of Silicon Valley who have used their unilateral power to silence opposing voices in America. In January 2021, big tech began to silence President Donald J. Trump and many other conservative voices. This is unacceptable. If big tech can censor the president of the United States, then they can censor anyone. To counter this liberal bias and dangerous exercise of tech monopoly censorship, Donald J. Trump and TMTG intend to create a media and technology company rooted in social media, digital streaming, information technology infrastructure, and more. In the year 2021, the media pendulum has swung dangerously far to the left. TMTG intends to even the playing field. Okay, this is a lot of text. I think there's way too much text on this. I would probably shrink this down to probably half the size of that. You could probably say, we aspire to create this media powerhouse. There's been this unilateral power. It's swung too far to the left. We intend to level the playing field. You could probably just go with that and make it bigger text, and then you don't have to like squint to read the whole thing. But I do want to call out that notice how right off the bat, they're going big picture. Because remember before in that press release, Trump said, hey, the purpose of this $1 billion we've raised is to, I don't remember exactly how he framed it, how he phrased it, but it was like, the purpose of this raise is to give a platform to all Americans, right? So what they're doing is going big picture right away and taking a stance of who they are so that there's no confusion. And I think that's really powerful. And I don't think enough startups do that, is be really clear about who they are. Because I think you're always worried about, oh, well, what if we say that, then we lose out on this potential customer or this potential type of person. But it's way better to mean a lot to a specific group of people than just mean a little bit to several groups of people. Right? Because that's how you build your tribe. That's how you build up your audience. And that's how you build your position ultimately. At the same time, I think what's probably most interesting about this is notice how, like, I think it's these last two sentences here, which don't really highlight well in this PDF. Notice how they say the purpose here is to level the playing field. They're not saying we are creating a right-wing media network. And I think that's really important because that position that they're taking here, which you'll soon see echoed throughout the entire presentation, is that TMTG and Truth Social are an inclusive platform. And because they are an inclusive platform, you'll see it creates a bigger market size. I feel like they realized they would have struggled to really sell this idea through if they had niched it down up front and say, we're building something only for the extreme right, or even just we're building something specifically for conservatives. I think what they want to do is establish themselves as anti-mainstream by taking the stance that mainstream itself is exclusive in favor of the left. So the response is not to go extreme right, but to have an everyone's invited approach. That's how I feel like they're spinning this, right? We're going to be like, what's existing is not inclusive, and we're going to create something that is inclusive. Again, you can debate sort of like the true nature behind a lot of the stuff, but from a storytelling perspective, I think that's what they're going for there. So they start with that big picture vision. And then from there, they kind of dive into like the beginning of the story, if you will. Tech monopoly censorship threatens free speech. And then you've got these different news article cutouts. What happened to freedom of speech? Liberal tech media outlets flex unilateral power to silence opposing voices. As we go into each of these slides, I think overall, to be honest, the presentation lacks a very clear storyline. Like, I think there are a lot of elements of story within it, but I don't think there's like enough of a clear story from start to finish, because it kind of like jumps around. But in this specific slide, what they're doing well here is using the slide header to help craft the narrative in their favor. Notice how this header does not say media landscape or media today. Instead, it gives you the angle that they want you to see the information through. Tech monopoly censorship threatens free speech. A lot of the presentations that I encounter will position things from a neutral standpoint, right? They'll have a slide where the header says problem. They'll have a slide where it says pricing, right? And those are all neutral delivery of the information. And when your header is neutral, you're leaving it to your audience to interpret whatever they want to from the information on the slide. Versus if your header takes a position, if your header is angled the way you want them to see the information, now you've created sort of like the starting point of their interpretation. It becomes harder and harder for them to not see that information through the lens of what you're presenting to them on the slide, which is why it's so important to use your headers as the lead almost to tell your story. I say this a lot in a lot of my material. A person, whether it's an investor or a customer, they should be able to just read, for the most part, just read your slide headers alone and get a pretty good idea of the opportunity that's available to them. Because if you think about it, a lot of people do pull up a PDF attachment in an email and they just start to scan through it. So if they're scanning through something that says problem, market size, pricing, customers, right? That's not helping them. That's not informing them of a story. That's not giving them a conclusion. But if they flip through that, attachment and they scroll through it, and the headers are directed, well, now by the end of scrolling through that, they've actually been told a story without you even needing to be in the room. So that's why that's another reason why it's really important to direct your headers appropriately. Design wise, okay, so I've talked before, like, it's amazing that this is like the design of this presentation and it raised $1 billion, because there's just so many things that were overlooked, including, get this, right? So you have these two images here. Twitter bans the US president, but Twitter maintains a Taliban account. But the image they used for banning the US president was one of the Taliban leaders. Like, to indicate Donald Trump as US president, they forgot to swap out the image. Like, my guess is they had an image and then they were going to drag something over it and they totally forgot to do that. So they're showing Donald Trump as one of the leaders of the Taliban, which is just crazy. And I cannot believe that they overlooked that, like that piece, like, which seems so crucial to the entire picture, especially this slide in particular. They did not fix that. And I want to know, like, because when I saw that, I was like, so give me an emoji of how you feel like you reacted to that realization that they overlooked that image there and made it the Taliban leader. Marvin's got the crying, laughing emoji. Nice. Okay, so from here, we get into the next slide, which is now it's, okay, there's a market opportunity to disrupt big tech. What if digital media wasn't the FANG monopoly? If you're not familiar with that acronym, FANG stands for Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google. So they're saying, what if digital media wasn't the FANG monopoly? Here's an example where I think the header could be directed a little bit. So like I said, like, there's some things they do well, some things they don't. So like that first slide, right? Like, this is a well-directed header, but this one is a little bit, I mean, I think it could be directed better. It's not totally neutral, but I don't think it's doing enough. I think it's a little too open-ended, because if your last slide says tech monopoly censorship threatens free speech, I think your next slide should probably say something more like censorship leaves out X% of, like, leaves out 76% of the user base, or leaves room for 76% of people to have their voice heard somewhere, something like that. I think that would make more sense instead of just general market opportunity to disrupt big tech. Now, from a design perspective, Twitter does not own these other companies, nor does it like organize or direct these other companies. So I don't know why Twitter's at the top here with this like shadow casting across all these other platforms. I mean, if anything, I mean, I would say like Google or Apple should be at the top of that if you were going to do some visual like that. But in reality, I think they should all be on the same plane. I don't know what the visual indication, I mean, it's wrong, but this essentially indicates that Twitter either owns all of these or whatever Twitter does, the rest of these follow. And that's just inaccurate. Now, I want to pose a question to everyone. So if you think back to the January 6th insurrection, the immediate technology fallout that came from that was Twitter banning Donald Trump from the platform, Facebook banning Donald Trump from the platform, Amazon disconnecting. I think and Amazon, Google, and Apple all like suspended or disconnected Parler from their app stores and from their web services. So we've covered Twitter, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, and Google. Why do you think Netflix is on here? Because Netflix like really had nothing to do with that, or is not really in that conversation to begin with around like censorship. Let me know in the chat. Why do you think Netflix was included on this slide? As you're thinking on that and as you're coming up with a response, remember earlier, just to help guide this a little bit, remember earlier, I talked about how they led with the big picture, right? Although Jason, your response is not, maybe is not too far off. It's just, it fits the acronym and they were lazy. That's entire, to be honest, I feel like whatever I say today, there could also be an asterisk to, well, I think they just got lazy and that's why they did it that way. I think that's a potential caveat. So Marvin, you said maybe because of the controversy of the Dave Chappelle stand-up that was aired. So Dapo's response there is really what's narrowing towards this or getting closer to this, right? Dapo said because they will plan to introduce their own version, right? Because remember at the beginning they talked about big picture, right? They talked about we're creating a media powerhouse, and we're going to fight back against big tech companies. It's media and technology rooted in social media, digital streaming, and IT infrastructure, et cetera. So Netflix is on this slide because they're going bigger picture than just their go-to-market product. They're talking about the future here. And in their future, they believe they're going to rival Netflix. So consider how you're pitching your own company. Are you pitching only what the base go-to-market product is today? Or are you pitching only what you have to sell today from a functional user perspective? Or are you able to get across a bigger idea, not necessarily of the specific technology, but directionally, like where are you headed and where are things headed and where can you take your customers or where can you take the market, right? If you can speak to the bigger picture, like one of the things you'll see, and this is something that we do in a lot of the pitch decks that we work on with our clients, is we try to create this picture of like, especially if the company has a plan to evolve the product into something later on, to say like, here's where, like, here's what it is, right? Here's the bigger picture that we're building towards. And here's step one towards that. Instead of, here's what we have today, but promise me we're going to get to this, we're going to get here later on if we get funding and if we do all these things, right? Because I think that's really too hard of a leap. It's too far of a leap to try and sell versus we've got like, we're clear on our vision. And to get there, we have to get through step one, right? Because now, you're almost like, you're like reversing it. And I think that's a more compelling way to get people to see your vision. Okay, so moving on. So now we get into, okay, so let's introduce Trump Media and Technology Group now. Here we are, Trump Media and Technology Group at a glance. So coming back to that question earlier of like, hey, why would Netflix's logo be on the previous slide? Well, the answer again is it's because it's how they are presenting the company, right? Notice how they're coming out and saying, we are all of this. We are Truth Social and we are TMTG plus. Of course, anyone who puts together streaming can't possibly get more creative than adding a plus to it. Don't get me started on that. So TMTG Plus will be this on-demand streaming network, right? It's not about starting small and maybe growing bigger. It's about leading with the big picture and then showing the steps that will get there. They don't just want a social network, they want a streaming network too. They want it all. They want media, right? Media and technology group, they want it all. I think the header on this one, instead of Trump Media and Technology Group at a glance, should be TMTG is the future of all media. Something like that, right? Again, directed a little bit better. I'd also say, to be honest, I would parse this out into multiple slides because this is an overwhelming amount of information on one slide. So I would say like what it is, like say, here's what we are first, just get across like the idea, and then do a separate slide with the market numbers, not try to fit it all in one slide. Whether you're pitching investors or pitching customers, a great rule to follow is one thought per slide, right? Don't try and cram a bunch of different thoughts or facts or numbers into a single slide. Because I think like, because right now, you don't necessarily even know where you're supposed to look, right? So if you think about design of something, it should, like, the person's eyes should be able to navigate in a linear fashion from one place to the next. Right now, I'm probably going to start with the logo in the center, but then I can go in one of 4 directions based on whatever I want to do. So there's a way you can use design to direct people's attention in a sequential fashion if you design things better and you strip out the amount of information that's on a slide. And again, you can see, right, they're like, hey, we can go up against Netflix and Disney and iHeartMedia, but we can also go up against Facebook and Twitter. Now we come to this next slide, investment highlights. Again, pretty neutral header. Again, these are all like, I think it's just so funny that these are all little like graphics that they're clearly pulling out of like the PowerPoint stock bank and then dragging into their slides. There's a few things going on this slide. So what I would do is parse this out into quick hitting individual slides. So I would have one slide that says, so to capture this part, I would have one slide that says, TMTG is poised to take advantage of an early stage secular shift in social media. I would have another slide that says, we're creating a galvanized media universe. I would have another slide that says, multiple revenue streams create built-in fail-safes. I don't think there's any need to upfront pitch a resilient ecosystem or a scalable infrastructure, which I do see a lot of, like really trying to pitch like, oh, we're on the cloud, right? Like here's a visual of our tech stack, which no one really cares about, to be honest. Maybe in a late stage conversation when you get like an IT person on the line, they may need to inquire about your tech stack, and that's when you can show a slide like that. But in an upfront pitch, please do not waste people's time talking about how you have cloud infrastructure, about how you're on this web service, right? How you've got this uptime, et cetera, et cetera. So now here's where the story goes. So we go from here. Okay, so we've talked about this is what we're going to do as a company. These are some things that are working in our favor. So now we come back to like, why might this make sense? And there's this slide, which I find particularly curious. The history of US media. Let's just assume the dash says is. The history of US media is political segmentation. And this kind of uses an example of something I call trend spotting, which is like, can you use either stats or trends, recent or historical, to get your audience to say, huh, you know, I never thought of it like that before. That's interesting stuff. Right? The second you can get your customer or your investor to say that to themselves, they're bought into the story with you, right? Because now you're teaching them something. And when you're teaching them something, they're gonna want to listen to you, because it's essentially like you're saying, you're able to position yourself as a thought leader, and you're able to put yourself in a situation where they're like, I mean, this was under my nose the whole time and I never realized it. And I do this day to day. I mean, how could I not have seen this? This person saw it. Man, they're showing me something that was so clear and I never even saw it. I've got to keep listening to what they have to say. Right? That's the effect you want to create on your audience. Because when you can do that, again, then they're more emotionally bought in, and then they're going to want to listen to you, and ultimately they're going to want to do business with you. Now, this is using trend spotting, but there is way too much text on this slide, right? I mean, they are literally writing paragraphs for each thing. Probably could have just done like 1796, newspaper split, 1987, Reagan Fairness Doctrine, right? 1990s, CNN. Although funny enough, this says 1990s cable television, and then the first stat is June 1980. So again, there's just some like key oversights that I can't believe weren't no one said, hey, that's in the wrong place, right? I also think what's kind of curious about this entire presentation is, because this is like the third or fourth time they've done it up to this point, notice how they'll frame something, but then they'll toss out a question. So like right here, right? Newspaper, radio, and cable TV have split along ideological lines. Will social media soon follow? If we come back a couple slides, where to go? Here, right? There's 15 million potential monetizable users, which creates X billion long-term potential revenue opportunity, 10 million potential subscribers, which creates how many billion long-term revenue opportunity? Market opportunity to disrupt big tech. What if digital media wasn't the FANG monopoly? So this is an interesting technique because they're kind of like providing the direction, but then they're getting you to imagine something, right? They're getting you to think about the possibility of a different future, right? None of these are asking you to reflect on the past. These are all questions that are asking you to ponder what the future might look like. So if you can get your audience to start asking those questions to themselves, now you're getting them to visualize they're almost beginning to complete the narrative themselves. So think through how you can incorporate those kinds of things into your presentation, right? Like, where is there a need to perhaps ask a future-leaning question? Again, none of these questions are about the past, right? How much money can we make? What if digital media didn't have this stronghold? Will social media soon follow, right? Because now you're like, I wonder if it will. Okay, I think it might, right? And it starts to kind of almost become like their thing they thought of instead of something that you told them. So now we get to this one. I think maybe you probably could have made this header here just like a concluding thought on this slide, right? Like maybe you could have done that. Otherwise, I just don't really see the need for this slide because I'm actually not even sure why these numbers exist. So if you can see this, they're saying, the newspaper population was 50, or sorry, in the 1800s, the US population was 50 million. And it's really just showing population growth. I have no idea why those numbers are relevant to an industry ripe for further segmentation and being a major rival to big tech. If anyone can figure out why they would just show population growth over the last 200 years to support rivaling big tech, please tell me. I'm curious if you have a take on that. So now we get into another slide here, which is Trump's historic social media following. So now they're starting to build the case for why this could work. And they're just getting across that Trump was very popular on these existing platforms before being banned. But I think this is more of a neutral header again, right? I think they could have titled this slide, "Our wait list alone is 146 million people before launch." Or we have a potential wait list of 146 million people, and we don't even have the product yet. I think that's a more compelling header because now you're like, oh, damn, there's 146 people waiting for something like this. As opposed to seeing a big number and just say, like, this is just kind of like almost like reflecting back on the on how great things on how great of a following he has, right? It's not necessarily pushing it in the direction forward to say these people are ready for us. So again, think through, how do you frame things? If you can frame them in a way that helps tell your story, then what they leave with is your story as opposed to any story. going to go through a few more slides in this. And then what I'm going to do, if we have time at the end, and if you want me to, I started rearranging the slides in the deck into what I think would be a better pitch for this. So we will do that if we have time and if that's something that you want me to do. Again, if you've got questions along the way, just use the Q&A and let me know, like, what's your reaction so far to what you've seen? Are you like, wow, this is a bad design? Or are you like, hey, this is interesting storytelling, right? Like, what are the things you hadn't considered before that you've seen so far in this? So this next slide, the inclusive big tent approach. And here's that reiteration of inclusive, right? Yeah, I'm like, must be nice to have people wanting to throw money at you. Yeah. Russ, this is remarkably amateur. I know, right? Like, there's a couple elements in here that are good, but overall the visual and how it's all coming together, I'm like, this is like a 3 or a 4 out of 10. So remember, right, that big vision that was delivered up front was about this inclusive media platform. And now you've got inclusive big tent approach as the name of the slide. So they're calling back to that idea of being inclusive. And now they're selling this specific idea of what they're calling big tent. Same issue. Where am I supposed to focus? There are way too many numbers on this slide. Now, I would say you're supposed to focus here first, but then from there, I can go in any direction. So use your design chops, use your design team, or use our design team, right? And design your slides in a way that guide the person's eyeballs down a sequential path. The other thing that I think it just blows my mind is the fact that all of these numbers that are on the right, they just repeat the exact same numbers that were here. And all of these numbers on the left just repeat the exact same numbers that were here. Right? Like, I don't know why the same numbers keep showing up over and over again as if it's new information, which, I mean, from a political standpoint, that is a good way to help people feel like they're seeing something new, is just repeat the same stuff over and over, but in different ways. I guess it's not terrible if you're trying to reinforce a specific point, but I don't see like what added value we have at this point. However, notice you have another question mark here, indicating or getting the person to ponder, right? Driving possibility. This is probably the biggest design. I mean, aside from the Taliban thing earlier, or was it Al-Qaeda? I don't remember. It was Taliban, right? Aside from the Taliban thing earlier, that being the major kind of design flaw of many, this one is also crazy to me in that they put the red figure, which is clearly conservative, on the left side, and the blue figure, which is clearly liberal, on the right side. Wouldn't logic say liberal left side, right? Conservative right side? But they, like, little things like that, I am shocked they did not think through. And no one said, hey, why don't we switch those figurines before we publish this? So now you get another slide, sizing the digital audience, neutral header again. However, there is an indication of possibility by saying potentially hundreds of millions of users. I do think there are cases where that idea of possibility and potential and asking questions, like if you do it a couple times, I think it can be really valuable. But if you're essentially doing it on every single slide, it's kind of just like being like, well, we don't have enough information at hand and we didn't want to do the research. So just think about it. It could be amazing, right? It's almost like a lot of puffery without saying a whole lot. Oh, wait, in the chat there, Marvin, that was a really interesting take there. He said, unless you're standing in the tent, and then it doesn't matter what side you're on. Yes. So that would be where it's like, again, use it in a couple places, but every single slide being like, it could be amazing, right? Which I think has kind of been like DJT's like agenda for a long time, is like, it could be great. Just think about it. And so that seems to be like the way he wants to pitch things anyways. But again, Like, why are all these numbers here? First off, what thing do you want me to look at on the slide? Which graph? And what information do you want me to take away? Because these are all charts of subscriber growth for each of these platforms over a 5 and 10 year period. Do you want me to see how many, like, if you're going to tell me that there's a digital audience and hundreds of millions of users, do you want me to know that subscription platforms have grown over time? Do you want me to know that these platforms have a lot of users today? Are you telling me every single one of these users is a potential TMTG user? And again, how much more can you repeat the same information? These are all the exact same numbers, right? Like 55, 214, 211, and 116 are all numbers we've seen in previous slides. It's just repeating the same stuff. Now we get to this one, which to me is like, nothing could have more of a doomsday effect than this image. It looks like the earth is being blown up or zapped in trying to get across the point that we're building a non-cancelable global community. Again, where they do show red and blue being involved, it looks like the convergence of red and blue is going to explode the universe. So I would probably go with a friendlier photo on that one if you're trying to say there is a market opportunity and everyone's invited. So now here you've got this slide says, hey, we're building a balanced large scale audience. Again, more of the same numbers. And the ones that you probably finally want them to pay attention to are tucked away in the bottom left corner in the smallest font of everything on the slide. Because I would think what you're trying to sell here is that there's a big market opportunity and there's a lot that we can capture. And there's a lot of revenue potential for us. And so why would that be all the way in the bottom left and smaller than everything else? Another example of using a question, again, by this point, it's overdone, but if you take it on its own, it's a pretty good tactic. And here's where you see, okay, here's like, we have the TMTG Plus, which will be visual media. We have the podcast network, and then we have the actual social media platform. And then I'm just gonna like scan through the rest of this. They got some advisors, right? And then to me, now I start to get confused on, are we in the appendix or are we still in the presentation? I think it's appendix at this point, because you have this slide about, don't get me started on how bad the design is here, right? You've got this talking about technology team, you got this infrastructure. Here's what I was saying before, as you'll see a lot of times in the feature of people's presentations is like, look, we have data racks, we have servers that support our technology. Don't do that stuff up front. And now we finally get some like product images and some more description on Truth Social itself, and then the infrastructure. Again, I don't know why you need to know all this infrastructure stuff behind it. The App Store, which is also just pointless to show that. We all know what an App Store looks like. Burgeoning truth can result in meaningful value creation. And then we have a little bit about the specific product of TMTG Plus, which is on-demand programming. American public is seeking non-woke entertainment. And here's who we can rival is these platforms. It's so funny to me that Disney got lumped into this because I don't think anyone's like watching Moana or watching Encanto and being like, that's the liberal media at play right there. Especially if you're like, 5 years old and you're watching that. Some background on this person who's done Deal or No Deal and America's Got Talent for why that would work. And then some more essentially backing stuff. Here's another one about potential, another version. The same numbers shown again, but in a different way. The exact same numbers, crazy. And then you've got, hey, here's some valuations that we can be hitting based on these other things. And then here's our revenue projections. We can hit $3 billion, $3.6 billion in revenue by 2026. Again, I don't know at that point if it was appendix or not. I think it was appendix. So that's what it is all in all. It really seems to dart around by that point. My final thoughts on this are that in addition to everything we've said so far, it's interesting to me that Trump himself is hardly seen throughout this entire presentation, right? Like the only place you actually see Donald Trump's face are in the sample of newspaper cutouts here. I don't think anywhere else he's shown. Oh, on the product shot, that's the other place you see it. He should have been showed on that slide instead of a Taliban person, but so I guess that would be one other place. But as I thought through that, I was like, his name is used, but his photo isn't. And I wonder if it's because this Digital World Acquisition Corp wants to leverage his popularity in this presentation, but at the same time, distance themselves from the notion that Trump himself would be running the company, or create the appearance that through all this work, they'd still be susceptible to his own personal controversy. On the other hand, the asterisk behind this entire thing is maybe it was just a design oversight. Maybe it was just a base design flaw and no one thought to raise their hand and say, maybe we should have more photos of him in here. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. I can go through that mock pitch now. Real quick though, if you have any questions, go ahead and just toss them up. Someone wants to see number 37 again. Yeah. Let's see here. Financial projection assumptions. This is how they're coming up with their numbers. If you have any other questions, throw them in the chat, either in the chat or the Q&A, that's fine. Ask them now, and then in the remaining minutes, I will go through sort of my own mock pitch, reorganizing the slides to have more of a story behind them. I will say it'll take probably like 5 to 7 minutes to get through that, so you might need to hang on with me here a little bit past the hour. Bianca, you asked, is this a final deck? To my knowledge, yes. This is what surfaced on the internet. And is like literally like I got this off of a link that was like it was like someone's, not like Google Drive, but like their Dropbox upload of the presentation, and it was backlinked from an article written by Charter, CHRTR.co. So let me go through this now if that's what y'all want. Oh, let me just make sure that is what we want to see. So go ahead and use the write pitch in the chat here if you want me to do the mock pitch of my reorganization of the slides, doing a mock pitch of that. All right, we got people saying pitch, and yes, okay, let's go ahead and do that. I gotta pull up a different document here. A couple caveats. All right, so a couple things before I get started on this. Number one, I reorganized these slides, but I have not practiced a pitch about this at all. So I'm going to be freestyling this. You might get some ums and ahs along the way, or some, wait, I would say it like this instead. Like, as I might interrupt myself to say, no, like this instead. That's number one. Number two is I am simply mock pitching this for the story that I think it should tell. But this is going to be a video that's on the internet. And in the event someone tries to slice out just the last 5 minutes of this, I do want to have a full declaration up front. I personally am not pitching this as a product that I believe in or endorse or anything like that. I am purely trying to say, hey, if I were the one who had to tell this story and it was something I believed in, here's how I would do it. And again, I also want to say I'm using the existing slides they had, because I didn't have the time or the desire to rewrite their slides for them. So I'm using the existing slides they had, and I've reorganized them in the exact way they were originally written. Okay, here we go. So we'll get past this, this risk factor stuff here. And let's pretend we're actually starting at the real start, which is here. Our mission at Trump Media and Technology Group is to fight for the First Amendment protections and freedoms of all Americans, protect democracy, and defend capitalism. This is so important because of where we've seen big tech take control of people's lives and take control of people's freedoms. So someone has to come through and level the playing field and build a truly inclusive media platform. and through that, develop a galvanized media universe. And at TMTG, we're going to make that happen. Here's why this needs to happen, and it needs to happen now. History, media, throughout the entire course of this country's history, has always fallen along a line of political segmentation. Whether it was the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans in the 17 and 1800s, or cable news launching in the 1980s and 1990s, every major form of media has intentionally split along party lines. Now, social media never intentionally split, it organically split. People started having their own kinds of conversations with the people that they wanted to speak with. And then because of that, the platform started to create these echo chambers where people were having their conversations in their own camps. But what happened as this organic segmentation, this organic drift started to take place? Those big tech platforms decided whose voices they wanted to uplift and whose voices they wanted to silence and cancel. And that's a big issue here, because this tech monopoly, their censorship that they go about threatens free speech. You have Twitter letting Taliban have a Twitter account, but not the US president? How wrong is that? You have Amazon dropping Parler just for having an app that people want to be on and have conversations about things that are important to them. How wrong is that? What's going to happen next if no one does anything about this? You're going to see a continued silencing until a large number of people are completely crushed because they don't have they're not allowed to say anything anymore. And that's where there's a huge opportunity to come in and say, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. And we're not going to allow that to happen. And that opportunity exists through all forms of media, whether it's social media or whether it's social media or whether it's visual media or any type of media that's out there. The FANG monopoly cannot persist, and we're here to do something about it. I want to introduce you to Trump Media and Technology Group. We are a galvanized media universe set to be the people's answer to silencing of free speech, the people's answer to cancel culture, the people's answer to wokeness. TMTG is here to be for the people and by the people. And the way we're going to do that is through a combined media network where we are going to exist wherever people talk, type, speak, or watch or listen. Right now, wherever they talk, type, text, hear, or watch, something like that, we're going to have a presence. That means an on-demand streaming platform of all types of content for people who want to watch, for people who want to listen. That means a brand new podcast network. And for people who want to type and talk, well, we've got Truth Social, a non-cancelable social media platform. Truth Social will look a lot like what you're already familiar with, which is why we believe our users are going to take to it and adopt it and use it regularly, because they're already used to using other platforms from a UX perspective. And we've modeled that into our own app design. Our mission specifically with Truth Social is to create that big tent platform to encourage open, free, honest, global conversation without discriminating people based on political ideology. And this idea of being big tent inclusive is really what we're aiming for. But to make sure we get there, to make sure we can expand to being totally inclusive, it's important we pull in the right user base at the start. And that's Donald Trump's existing followers, right? He has so many of them across these different platforms, 146 million in total, in fact, who are fed up with what they're getting on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and they're looking for a place to go to be able to express their ideas freely and openly. And with that as our initial go-to-market audience, we'll build up a user base And from there, we'll be able to open up the tent to anyone and everyone. But it's important we get it right with our core users first. And after we master Truth Social, that's when we launch TMTG Plus and really become the galvanized media universe. Wherever people are watching, wherever people are listening, we've got a presence. On-demand content, on-demand entertainment, on-demand news that is, again, does not censor free speech and is non-woke. And we believe strongly in the ability to have success in the entire media landscape because of President Trump's unrivaled history of success in media and entertainment. And that inclusive big tent approach is where everyone's going to be invited in, and people won't think of TMTG Plus as just for the conservatives. They'll think of TMTG Plus and TMTG as a whole as for the people. Some specific things that are working in our favor to make that happen is this shift that's already started to happen towards being more secular on social media platforms, right? We're just capturing that trend at the very early stage. We also, and we believe capturing that will allow us to build this, again, galvanized media universe. And on top of that, there is what we believe so strongly in getting this to a point of viability is the fact that we're not going to just be supported by ads, but we're not going to just be supported by paying users. We're going to have both. We're going to have both subscription revenue and ad-supported revenue. And the key to having both is that we've actually built in fail-safes for ourselves. Because if we're solely reliant on an ad model, we can't control if advertisers start doing things differently. If we're solely reliant on a user subscription model, well, what if there's natural market churn? By having paying users on both sides, we're creating our own backup system. We're uplifting revenue overall and creating our own backup system in case one thing falls behind. And that's what gives us such huge potential, right? We've already seen the user and the subscriber growth and the revenue growth of other major subscription-based entertainment platforms. So the sky is the limit for us. And especially considering when we've got someone who is a major TV executive, having launched some of the most popular shows in TV history under his name, when we've got him at the helm of TMTG Plus, I can't reinforce enough how much the sky is the limit. Along with that, we've got some key advisors. And when you take all of this into consideration, where we can go with Truth Social, where we can go with TMTG Plus, where we can go with TMTG, the media conglomerate, this idea of a galvanized media universe, well, Twitter alone is valued at a 6.6x multiple. And what we're asking today is just $1 billion to do something that could double or triple or quadruple that. So if you believe that the future is free speech, if you believe that the future is inclusive, if you believe that the future shouldn't be canceled, well, we ask you to join us on this ride and join us in building TMTG. All right, that's my freestyle pitch of that presentation. I can hang around for a couple more minutes if you've got any other questions or if you have any thoughts on that one. Did you like that? Did you hate it? Did you have any suggestions along the way? Please let me know. And of course, reach out to me if you want help in building out your own building out your own story, right? If you're trying to raise capital soon, let me know. Let's work together. If you're trying to win customers, let's figure out the right story for your audience. I'll follow up with the recording and I'll also follow up with the slides. And if you want, I can also follow up with my reorganized version of the slides as well. I'll just give you an access to a whole folder. So yeah, so that's what I've got for you all today. I hope you enjoyed this. Again, if you got any final things you want to ask in the chat or any final comments, go ahead and do that. And I'll stick around for another couple of minutes. Otherwise, if you got to run, for those of you who already ran, totally understand. For those of you who are still here, thank you for staying a little bit overtime. And I appreciate you being here. So I'll hang on for another 60 seconds or so if I see any questions come in. Otherwise, feel free to take off and I will catch you all soon. Happy storytelling. John, you are very welcome. Yeah, Mike, I am also amazed this raised $1 billion, right? And seen far better struggle to raise $1 million or even 100,000. Again, I think if you've got the other thing I would say is like, if you've got the connections already in the capital, it sometimes doesn't even, a lot of times doesn't even matter. But I also wonder if that reporting is skewed, right? They reportedly raised $1 billion. I don't know if anyone can find like, or was there like a formal like filing anywhere for that? Perhaps maybe they said they raised $1 billion, but they actually raised less than that. They obviously did something because they did launch last week or earlier this week. All right, thank you everybody. Appreciate you being here. I will catch you all soon. Take care.